I'm very excited to welcome Tembe Denton-Hurst, celebrating the release of Homebodies. Tembe, known on the internet as @Tembe, is a book-obsessed beauty and culture writer and author. Currently, she works as a staff writer at New York Magazine's The Strategist, where she covers beauty, lifestyle, and books. When she's not writing, Tembe can be found on her couch in Queens, where she lives with her partner and their 2 cats, Stella and Dakota. Homebodies is her debut novel. And our moderator tonight is Reggie Bailey. He's the co-founder and executive producer of Bookstore Pop Culture, the talk show that asks the questions pop culture deserves to the authors who create it. He's the creator of 10 Books, 10 Decades, the Biggest Book Challenge, and a literary citizen who believes that books are a form of entertainment that should occupy the same space in our cultural lexicon as film, television, music, video games, and fashion. Okay, so please welcome Tembe and Reggie.
I think they want to hear you read a little bit of it. You know the scene I want you to read.
I know. I'm not reading that scene. Y'all have to buy the book and read that scene yourselves. Thank you guys for being here, though. Hello, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and then also unfamiliar faces, which is very cool. Okay. Sorry, guys.
I'll give you a page number if you want.
I'm going to start with page 1. Okay. The day that everything changes tends to feel like any other, at least at first, which is why Mickey hadn't suspected anything when Chelsea Cook asked her if she was going to that beauty event after work. The event was being thrown by a fancy fragrance brand known for peddling genderless perfumes that, to Mickey, smelled mostly like musky men's deodorant with occasional hints of gardenia or jasmine or rose. She expected to slog through it like all the other events she attended, trading niceties with the other writers and editors until it was time for her to go home. She didn't expect to find out that her job, the one she'd been doing for just shy of a year, was in jeopardy. This she would learn over mixed drinks in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the West Side Highway from the very same Chelsea who had spoken to her all day as if she wasn't harboring this kind of life-altering news. Mickey should have known that something was up when, an hour into the event, Chelsea pulled her to the side and said, "So I want to tell you something, but you can literally never tell anyone that it came from me." But still, Mickey hadn't suspected anything. Chelsea and Mickey had never been friends, never leaned into the black girl camaraderie that she'd hoped for. Outside of the occasional knowing look during an all-hands meeting, which sometimes resulted in Mickey gawking at Chelsea and her impressively sleek silk press, they rarely spoke. Chelsea was closer with the girls on her team, fashion types who, in a past life, were Midwest Christian types, born again fuzzy pink cardigans and Dries boots. But that didn't stop people from thinking they were closer than they were, or, admittedly, rarely, mistaking one for another. Mickey had hoped the tides were turning, that perception had somehow morphed its way into the truth. She thought the next words out of Chelsea's mouth would be office tea, that someone was pregnant or that their parent company, Bevy, was acquiring another digital property they had no business owning. Mickey nodded enthusiastically about keeping things secret and smiled conspiratorially, ignorant of her own demise. She'd even leaned in closer so Chelsea wouldn't have to speak so loudly. "A friend, and I can't tell you who," Chelsea began, taking a sip of her freshly mixed drink and plucking a convenient-to-eat cone of ceviche from a cater waiter with shimmering bronze skin. "Told me that Nina reached out and mentioned that there would be an opening on your team in a few months." She brought the cone to her mouth and bit down. "For your role." Mickey's chest seized violently at the news, but she held her face still, allowed a small "oh" to escape from her lips. Chelsea continued to chew, staring at Mickey with an unreadable expression. It dawned on her that this wasn't an act of friendship, but one of duty. She was looking out, and Mickey was grateful. It's what she would do if the roles were reversed. Now that Chelsea had gotten the big part out, the rest came easier. My friend ignored her at first, but then Nina reached out again and asked for a meeting. Mickey's mouth hung slightly open, and she felt the tears pressing at the back of her throat. They were tears of embarrassment, of incredulity. But she knew how they would read, as tears of despair. But she couldn't cry here, in an apartment she could never afford with people she saw no less than 3 times a week. It would be the talk of post-event wrap-ups between PR girls dressed in tasteful black, that Mickey had cried into a lobster ceviche, and they all had to turn the other cheek. The other writers and editors would talk too, waiting until the next beauty event to place a gentle hand on her forearm and ask if everything was okay. Mickey refused to give them the satisfaction. This isn't what she would be remembered for. "Wow," was all she said, twice and then twice more, her voice thicker each time. She was surprised, given that a few hours earlier, Nina had asked her to present a vision for the site's beauty and culture vertical. It was due in a few days, and Mickey had believed there was a small chance she was getting a promotion. That maybe she'd been through everything she'd been through thus far was to sort of test to see if Mickey could handle more. I know, it's crazy. And my friend doesn't want it because she's happy where she is, but I just wanted to let you know, so you know. Chelsea sprinkled the debris from her hand into a napkin and stuffed it in her drained drink, the garnish stuck to the bottom with the leftover ice. Yeah, I know. I know this sucks. It does, but are we surprised? Nina's incompetent and she never liked me anyway. You know, she made me write a story twice, only to bury it with the help of her senior editor, and she didn't even tell me. The senior editor felt bad and let me know. They don't like us, period, Chelsea said with a nod of the head. Mickey hesitated to agree with that, because they very much liked Chelsea, who was a senior beauty editor at one of their sister sites. Although the two seemed worlds away online, Chelsea's publication catered to white middle-aged women with bank accounts that didn't need checking, and Mickey's was aimed squarely at the daughters with whom they had strained relationships. They only sat 3 rows apart. But she nodded anyway, because us was a shorthand for black women in general, which Mickey would say was accurate, at least most of the time. They took synchronized sips of their endlessly refillable mixed drinks and traded gossip before calling Ubers home. But the air remained heavy, the unease encasing every word. How far away is yours? Chelsea asked, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone. The sun had plunged into the Hudson River hours ago, and now they were all burdened by their glass reflections, the shimmering lights of New Jersey blinking back at them. Mickey stopped her frantic texting to check. She fired off an SOS text to her industry group chat composed of interns turned editors, friendships forged by fire. 2 minutes, you? She checked her messages and frowned at the thick blue block of text staring back at her. No reply. Same. Let's walk out. Mickey gathered her things, a branded tote bag she carried all her work stuff in, and even more totes filled with all the random products she'd received over the past few days. Single-word brands that stood out with curved, pointed fonts and bright, punchy hues. Mickey's arm was a kaleidoscope of color. She headed for the door, and the bag sagged as she walked, weighing down her shoulder and cutting into her skin. A physical reminder that this was what she had asked for. The excess, the access, the burden.
Mickey Hayward.
Yeah, that girl.
Nah, she is that girl. She is that girl, and she wanted it all too. And we get a glimpse of that in what you just read. But you know the scene I'm talking about later, where she's on the court and she's talking, and she's letting everybody know that she wants the Pulitzers, she wants the office. She wants, the staff writer position, but she is in a cutthroat industry, right? And I wanted you to talk a little bit about the battle between her ambition and just this cutthroat industry in the media that she is up against.
Yeah. I think, everyone's not going to make it, right? And I think the idea that Mickey's good at her job is really left up to debate, or if she even is capable of the things that she aspires to, is that even within her reach? But that doesn't mean she shouldn't try. But there's so many people fighting for the same dream, and I think sometimes, it's interesting. I wanted to write about someone who, feels like, oh, maybe this is within my reach, and then it's all ripped away. Because it's really hard, I think, when you're striving, whether you're good or you're not good, whether you're, it doesn't stop you from having a dream. And the industry is hard. Everybody is not going to get a Pulitzer. They did 2 books to fiction. That was unheard of. I feel like Oprah called and was like, Barbara's book was good.
Look. You can't just be Ernan, all right?
Yeah, no, literally. But, everybody's not going to get that in their lifetime. All the books are going to come out, and some of them are just going to exist, or all the stories and articles are going to come out. Everybody doesn't get an award for that. You don't get participation prizes in writing. And I think that, I wanted to write about a black woman who had boundless ambition, but a questionable amount of talent. We don't know.
Damn. Oh, let's sit with that for a little second. Questionable talent?
In the sense that she's good. I mean, we can assume that she's fairly good, but I don't know if we're if she's Pulitzer level good, right? But she just wants that.
Oof. Talk about being honest about your characters. All right. Okay. Well, I'll say this, right? Speaking of being honest, right? I didn't tell you because when we spoke previously, there was a scene in there that I was supposed to interrogate.
Which
you about.
one?
Okay, so Mickey is riding from. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Next. Sorry about that. So Mickey's on a train from New York back to Maryland.
Right.
And there's a brief moment. So, full disclosure, I live in Delaware. I'm not from there, but I live there. So, when she rides by Delaware, she's like, "Oh, it doesn't look like there's nothing out here, just trees." And I was wondering, like, what's going on there? Yeah, like what
was that about?
Yeah, like did Delaware do something to Mickey or Tembe or?
Is there more than just trees?
I'm out there.
I mean, yeah, but I was like, and then like trees in Reggie Bailey's house.
That would have worked. That would have worked. You know, maybe in the revised edition we'll put that in there.
Absolutely. I'll make a footnote.
Okay.
I got you.
Cool. Now we got that out the way. We'll get back to Mickey.
Amazing.
Right? So with Mickey, right? I talked about just her trying to make it in this world, right? But something that was fairly interesting to me that you were getting at, which is very true about just, I want to say just authors and just writers in general, is the loneliness in the pursuit, right? And there's talk in there about how she has not basically connected with like home or her friends or family like in a while.
Right.
And I think that is very unique to just like writing and just bookish and clearly like media endeavors as well, right? And could you talk about just creating that distance and setting that up before the reader even gets to Mickey getting home and like why it was important for you to really speak to that?
Sure. I think Mickey's running, right? Like, and I think that's what, when we see the second half of the book and she goes home and she's interrogating all these things, that she realizes that she had used her career and her ambition as an excuse to not, look at the rest of her life. But I think that when you're in pursuit of like greatness or this ambition or this dream, a lot of times like that becomes your identity and everything else falls by the wayside, because you're like, if I miss this party, if I miss this thing, if I don't go to this event, if I don't make myself 100% available, if I don't give it 110% and kill myself, then somehow I'm going to miss my opportunity. I'm going to miss my chance, because, we know it's not just talent. Especially if you want to see the flowers in your lifetime. Like if you don't want your like photographs to be discovered in a trunk in somebody's attic in 150 years and like they're like, oh, this talent, she was just an ordinary woman. I'm speaking about this very specific photographer, but it's still like whatever. It's like, they like discovered her stuff in a trunk and they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. But like she never made any money from that. I think like as an artist in this era, to have a viable living, it does take a lot of self-sacrifice. I mean, you could theoretically do it and like stay connected to your community, and that's beautiful and that's admirable and well and good. But I think that you're leaving home, and I think there's also this unique space in the DMV where it's like a lot of people want to get out, and I think that's true for anything, like any hometown. But a lot of people want to like move to New York or move to LA or like in search of these big cities, like these big dreams that they don't feel like are attainable here. And she's very much a product of that environment and feels like she's succeeded, and coming back home is like she has like a lot of shame around that. And so
Yeah, no, and that was a big theme too, right? Like Mickey coming home and not being who she felt she was supposed to be, right? And that was working alongside of her thinking she's not the person that they wanted her to be. And the way I related to that was like wild. It was out of pocket, right? And could you speak to that a little bit too? Just not fulfilling like yours, and even the thought that you're not fulfilling anyone else's expectations, yet you can't run from the fact that, okay, I have to see these people. Yeah, I'm gonna see them.
Yeah, I think self-perception is real. Like that's a big thing. And even if people aren't putting that pressure on you, I think sometimes you put that pressure on yourself about how you think people want you to show up, how you think they want you to exist in the world, how you think they want you to perform. And this idea, like in her mind, like they can't just be proud of her for the sake of being proud of her because she exists. It's like, okay, well, I have all of these things. And I think her queerness is totally bound up in that. I wanted to write about her struggle is not that her parents don't accept her, but she's using her queerness as like a tool to overcompensate for not having to explore like the fullness, the messiness of her life. She's like, okay, I have this ambition, so I'm so good that you can't look at this other thing, which I think happens with blackness as well. Like I'm so talented, you can like ignore the fact that I'm black, or you can ignore the fact that I'm queer. You can ignore the fact, like this idea of like this exceptionalism and undeniability, but then she's failing at that. And I think that those are things that she's constantly grappling with and thinking through and worrying about even if no one's actually communicating that to her, and it causes her like an intense amount of stress, and it like bears down upon her and her identity throughout the novel. And so that was really important for me to explore, because I think a lot of people feel about like that way, but don't necessarily say that. And when you leave and you go and you seem to be living a life that a lot of people don't have a conception of, like, oh, you moved to New York and then you work in media. And because it's such an opaque industry, and the media of right now is nothing like the media of the 90s or the early 2000s with like black car service and budgets and all of this. Like, absolutely not. No one's getting paid any money. We're all working in these like sweatshop type vibes, like in these buildings with no ceilings, essentially. Like, it's all exposed work, like whatever. You can like see the ducts, and like we're all, you know, everyone thinks it's very glamorous. And in some ways it is. We have free snacks, but like, it's not what everybody thinks it is. You know, like there aren't these like big glass walls. Like, I mean, even you go to Condé, and like back in the day, it's like they have this whole building, like there's all this stuff. And now it's like Glamour and Vogue and all of them are like splitting floors. Things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, you know? And it's like, so people think that it's like this big, massive production, when in reality it's continuing to shrink. And so because there's this idea, like the perception is not the reality, and Mickey's aware of that, but she's like wielding this cultural currency and like holding it really tightly, and like using that as a way to differentiate herself from the people that she knows and the people that she loves and the people that raised her. Coming back empty-handed feels so much like a failure, especially because she set herself up to like think of herself as separate and apart from this. You know, and I think that that is a lot of like what happens in your early 20s. Like when you're trying to find your identity, you only know who you are because of who you are not. You know, so she's really struggling with that. Like there's this real big loss of identity.
Yeah, you be spitting. You be spitting. No, I like that. I like that. You know who you are because you know who you're not. Like I will attribute that to you, but I'm gonna say that.
Okay, I love that.
Okay,
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Say that. Yeah, you ever
Absolutely.
heard of Tembe Denton-Hurst? She created that. So, speaking of like just not living up to expectations, T's journey in the book is very, very intriguing. Right,
Yeah.
when you learn about just her basketball background, and you even see how, you know, the locals, right, like her people see her, like calling her washed and all this other stuff, right? But ultimately, she still has like a hold on Mickey, right? And it was interesting to me that Mickey didn't care about all that, right? And I think I know why, but I would still like to hear you like talk about that a little bit. What is it about T where, you know, Mickey hears everybody say this and say that, but she's still willing to see for herself?
For sure. Nostalgia is a powerful drug, you know? And I think the way that people make you feel, and you kind of enshrine them in this amber, and she's like searching and chasing this old thing. Because in a lot of ways, even though we get older, we don't always mature. You know, we don't always grow. I think there's like some Maya Angelou quote where it's like, it's harder to grow up. Like, it's easy to just kind of exist. And so when she goes back home, she's very much still stuck in that emotional state. And like, whose attention did she value the most at that time? Who, like, she just, you know, had divorced herself from that and wasn't dealing with any of those things. So when she gets back, she's like, even though nobody sees you this way anymore, because this isn't the reality and what we've been keeping up with you, I still see you this way because I have no other context for this. Like, you know, she just kind of like dropped it and dipped and then came back and was like, oh, now I have to just pick this back up. But I think that so much of that, like, hasn't changed. And in so many ways, like, Mickey betrays herself in a lot of situations because she's chasing this need that she has. And that was really important for me to explore. And I think that, like, for people who have been in that situation before, they'll get it on the page. And people who've reached out to me have been like, I understand this. You know, and I think it's only as you live life where you understand, like, you put yourself in situations where you're doing things not based on what's best for you, but like you're trying to address a need and a void that's like so much, like so big, it almost swallows you up. And she's just like, yeah, she's spiraling.
Yeah. No, that's all true, right? So this is the thing that I'm not supposed to ask, and I'm going to figure out a way how to ask this, right? So there's a word that starts with D and ends with matized, right? that happens, that I've heard happens.
Sure.
And I don't know what I would call that in this situation, but I want to say that Mickey was matized by T.
For sure. That's also a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we
like,
got
like literally all the R&B girls, like, you just got to listen to them. That's literally what the songs are about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we got that on wax.
Yeah, she's stuck.
Yeah, she is. And speaking of R&B,
Yes.
I always love it when I see like my life in a book, right? So you got Summer Walker makes a little appearance in there. I saw some Jill Scott, saw Lucky Day. Could you just talk about kind of like the soundtrack you were trying to lay?
Yeah.
For Homebodies and why ultimately that is. I think it's appropriate for the book too, but could you talk about just choosing those like specific artists to just even in passing just to include them in there?
Yeah, I was actually talking to my cousin about this earlier, about how like I mark so much of my life in music, and music is super important to me. We were talking about how if I think about like, I think we were talking about, that song like SEX, take a deep breath. I think before we were talking about like the amount of after school special music that was being made in the early 2000s. That was like it was a lesson and a hook and a beat, and we were like, why is this happening? But that specific music like reminds me of like going to like summer camp at UDC with my cousins and like the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and it reminds me of like these very specific moments of my life. And so I kind of wanted to think about Mickey's like auditory journey and like the ways that she would have interact with music or the way that it would like inform her life, because I think, I don't know, I feel like all Black people love music, so I couldn't like leave it out. And yeah, also I just like, I thought it was fun. I was like, oh yeah, like throw some Lucky Day in here, throw some Cleo Soul in here, like that's stuff I listen to. And so I was like, all right, like that's gonna be Mickey's music too.
Yeah, no, and it was fly. It was dope to see too. And I even liked the bit where, because I was talking about something like this yesterday, where she's kicking it with T, and T puts on some R&B, and she's like, "Oh, I thought you'd be listening to trap." And T's like, "Please, like." So
I'm cultured.
Yeah, no, I thought that was real dope. So let's talk about Lex.
Yeah. Let's talk about Lex.
Because if this was Insecure, right? And let's say how they did Team Lawrence versus Team Issa. So I'm Team Lex.
Okay, period.
Because like
it's set up that way.
And I think Lex is like incredible, right? And I think that, and I'm even advocate for her a little bit, okay? Because I think Lex was doing, I think what they call the second shift, if I'm not mistaken, because she was going out, going out and getting it. But then she was coming home. She made sure the house was clean for Mickey. She made sure to feed Mickey. She did a little bit of that. What was that Matthias thing I was talking about? She was like, she had the Matthias. She might have been missing the second,
Yeah, got you. Yeah.
But she was doing her thing. And I think that Mickey, I'll put this a little, I'll chill. This is a chill version. I think Mickey was a little unfair.
I hear that.
Right? And I want you to talk about that dynamic, though, because this is the thing. I do feel like that's real, though. It's very real. It's very real where you can get, like, pampered, right? But ultimately, it's, like, not enough.
Right.
And could you talk about just their relationship? And just that journey, what you wanted to showcase.
Yeah. So I think like Homebodies in a lot of ways is a book of mirrors. Like everybody's mirroring Mickey in one way or another. Yeah. And her and Lex meet at a time in their early 20s that like, they both have a lot of holes and they just smother them with each other. And they're like, okay, we're in love. Like this works. We take care of each other. We've set this dynamic. Like it all works. And then Mickey goes through this deep transformation and recognizes like, even though I have this perfect life, the life that I dreamed of, in a lot of ways, the life that I've built exactly to my specifications, it's still not working. And I think that, that level of dissatisfaction is so like scary to grapple with, because you're like, what do you do next? Because you have your perfect idea of it. And I think also Lex represents, and originally the book was called Women Working, and everyone told me that's not a real title. I was like, okay, fine. But it was about like the various forms of labor that Black women perform, and often they perform it in service of like a corporation or white people or like men essentially. But I was like, what if Black women are all performing this work in service of each other? And like, what does that look like? And what does it look like for Mickey to be a taker in this situation and to absorb all of that? Like, I wanted to have a selfish Black woman on the page, or a woman who seems to have it all and like thinks that she deserves more, or like can be dissatisfied and be like, oh, I liked, but not for me. You know, like I wanted to give her this like dynamic ability. And also I think just to show like a real relationship, like that's kind of, I feel like how real relationships look. Like even though things feel good and everyone gets along and it's like 97% there, you know, but it's like not 100%. And then I think also this idea that in their relationship, she also doesn't feel seen. And she doesn't feel, and that to her is like so much more important. And being seen is like more important than everything else. And like Lex can't see that because Lex isn't designed that way. Like she doesn't have that access to her emotions in the same way, or like she's not feeling the same way. And I think feeling lonely inside of a relationship is something that people don't write about or talk about as often as we could. And I thought it was interesting to like explore.
No, it was very interesting, and you know, you're walking into something very interesting too, because I think part of the reason why Lex could only see Mickey but so much is because of work. Mm-hmm. Right? And you were talking about that with the title mm-hmm. that you were going to use. And, you know, I thought of it because, you know, Lex been working since she was, 19 mm-hmm. or something like that. And, you know, I want you to talk further about Black women's relationship to work mm-hmm. in your text. Not only Lex, but even Mickey, even T, right?
Right.
T's work, right? T kind of had multiple jobs in a way mm-hmm. because one of her jobs is at the store or whatever, but then another job is fronting. Mm-hmm. Right?
She worked hard at that.
No, for real. For real. Like I'm not even. That's no gas. Like fronting. Like she put in a lot of effort into that. And could you just talk about, at least with those three, right? Just their multiple jobs mm-hmm. and just what you're ultimately saying about just these Black and queer women just working so hard for mm-hmm. whatever it is they're seeking.
Yeah. I think to like talk about Black women's relationship to work, we got to take it all the way back, right? Like a lot for the Black American woman, that is your primary function in every single situation. Like if you're not here to work, then what are you here for? You know? And so I think exploring that is in offering Black women rest in any capacity. It makes some people uncomfortable. Like I think they're gonna look at it and be like, oh, like why doesn't she just get up and do something with herself? Why do we always have to do that? Like what is that about? You know, like I can't write some like Grey Gardens ass book where they're like, you know, just like languishing on chairs in like a dying Victorian home. Like, you know, then that's like, oh yes, like we love to see a white woman spiral, but to see a Black woman do the same thing is almost horrifying to them because they're like, this is actually the exact opposite of what I thought was going on behind the scenes. Like I thought they were, you know, like oiling their braids and like making butter. Like, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think they like they thought that, you know, like we were like, somehow we're always and it's like, we really are like swans in a sense, like, you know, running underneath the water, but like holding it all together on top. And that's all of them. And I think that we internalize that narrative. I mean, we talked about on the podcast about like unemployment and why that's so scary, because I was like, it's, you know, Black people are always kind of a step. I mean, we can argue, there's been arguments that Black people are socially dead, right? But then this idea that to be unemployed is like the beginnings of a real social death. Like you don't participate in capitalism, you're not participating in a system. So what are you good for? And all of them are grappling with that. And grappling with image and because it's like this idea, the work fulfills them and gives them value, you know? And so feeling a loss of value when you're not engaging in work, I think like everyone engages in that, like white, Black, whatever, because of the fact of capitalism. But for Black people, it's uniquely traumatizing because that's all we were ever really afforded. That was the only role we were allowed to have, like mule, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's, for real, because there is this like extreme sense of guilt that I've experienced when I have been unemployed, and I know it's like it can't be normal. Yeah, you know. So yeah, like that's you preaching again. So where do I want to go next with you? Let me put my phone out. That's wet because of the water.
Oh my God.
It happened earlier, you know, and hopefully I ain't mess it up, you know. But anyway, so
yes,
let's talk about this, because I thought this was interesting this time, right? You know, you peep something when you read it 2 times. So in the beginning, I noticed, you know, just casually, Mickey is reading The Eyes Watching God.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But then, because you're clever, there's another scene later where she is at church with Grandma Anna.
Yeah.
right? And we could call this like, I guess, visiting God, right? And I want to know like what that bookending is, right? And what you were hoping to say about like Mickey's relationship like to faith.
Right. Yeah, I think that, Christianity is so deeply entrenched in the Black community. And I think, if you're so lucky, you have a praying grandmother, right? I have 2. One is here.
Shout out to the praying grandmas.
Shout out to the praying grandmas. And so, but I think that Mickey's relationship to faith is it's complex because of her queerness. She's aware of the discourse. She's aware of the conversation. But I think it's a space where she always feels some level of safety and a level of protection without necessarily having to directly engage with that, because a lot of that labor is being taken on and unseen, like by Grandma Anna. Like, she takes on that role for her family, is to protect them spiritually. And so for Mickey, she doesn't really know that she needs to engage in that herself or like protect herself spiritually. So she's not really aware of that yet, but like it's kind of like we're seeing the rumblings of that, because I think the book is very slice of life in the sense that it's not Mickey at her like most healed or her most formed. It's at the moment that her life falls apart. We see her in this moment of transition. And the reason why I wanted to write about transition was because it always feels like nothing is happening and you're making all the worst choices, but it's like right before that breakthrough. And I think it's like, in a sense, a little bit of a sermon, right? Like, everything seems like everything's good and God has bigger plans. Like, there's almost this kind of like hero's journey, if you will, the kind of journey they take you on every single Sunday at church, like where you're like in the belly of the beast, in the bottom of the bottom of the trenches, and then she emerges, not necessarily completely made over again, but new in some way. And it's like a lot of it is about Mickey learning to have faith in herself. And, I have my own ideas about God and the purpose of God, but like, to me, God is love, and Mickey discovering that love for herself is in some ways Mickey discovering her own divinity and discovering God.
Yeah, no, that's dope too. That's dope too. I'll ask like, I guess, one more, and then I'll open it up, right?
Yeah.
And something that was also interesting to me is her relationship in response, I should say, to the word superstar, right? Because when T says it, it's like the most beautiful word ever,
right?
But when Scotty says it after, this is in the synopsis, so I can talk about this after the letter, right? It is, there's some sense of discomfort around like the superstar. Could you talk a little bit about the work you're doing with this idea of superstardom and the work and how Mickey responds to it in different situations?
I think her thing is that her biggest dream in the moment is like being on T's pedestal. And so this idea that she's being seen by this person who she's always wanted to see her in a very specific way is positive. Being seen by the world and then having to deal with the weight of the world's opinion, which she's very acutely aware of, is a completely different beast altogether. Being adored by someone who you adore in return, the stakes are in some ways very high for the soul and high for the ego. But when you start to introduce 100 different opinions, it's so scary. Like, it's just like an extreme kind of vulnerability. Like the adoration of one person is one thing, but then you're going to be a superstar in the literal sense, in the Beyonce sense, in the think piece sense, is for you to open yourself up to criticism and praise. And all of that is a hell of a drug. And I think she's very aware of like, if it goes well, like there's repercussions to that too. Like, it's not just like, oh, I become famous and this is great. She kind of has this sense of the complexity of that being real. Her whole entire experience with T is a fantasy. It's like for her, like an escapism. It's all taking place under the summer sun and the heat, and it's hot, and she's sweating all the time, and it's like, this is just a fever dream in a sense. But then the reality of her life now being shaped by other people's attention is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, and it just made me think of her relationship to preparation as well, right? And how you can always say, yeah, I think I want this thing, whatever this thing is, but when you get it,
right,
which you can't control, are you gonna be ready?
Exactly, for sure. And you don't know until you know.
Yeah. So, any questions?
Yes, Mom. Oh, I can hear her. I can hear her. Go ahead, Mom.
I'd like to know, just moving forward, could you give us some insight into the next book that is
Sure.
little slice of what you're thinking about?
Sure. The thing that I'm working on now involves two of the characters that are already in Homebodies, but I'm also cheating on that book with like a romance novel because I'm like, why not? It's kind of fun. I like writing about romance. It's like fun to do. So yeah. Yes, sister.
So my question for you is, how do you deal with people having their own personal thoughts about your book? I mean, I don't know if you saw any negative comments. I deleted some. But how do you deal with?
Negative commentary. I think it's interesting to I think it's valuable because I think what people don't like, or like, I think a lot of the feedback has been, like, oh, like, I think one review, someone was like, Tembe somehow like found the most boring part of the book and like stayed there for the whole entire time. And I was like, okay, fine. That's how you feel. Like, I'm like, I understand what you came in here wanting to read about, right? It was like the high octane world of media and like the ins and out and like very bold type. I'm like, no, but you didn't really want to read about a black woman breaking down. That wasn't what you were interested in. And I mean, we can blame HarperCollins for the marketing, sure, whatever, fine. But like, ultimately, that's what I wanted to explore and that's what I did. And so for me, like, as long as the intention of the book is being understood, I can like process the rest of it, because I'm like, you know, I can't be too obsessed with things like you didn't understand me. You know, like being understood is very important to me, but the people who understand you are going to understand you. You can't like force that. And if it was for everyone, I don't think it'd be a good situation either. Like I wrote for black women, and that's who I was speaking to. And so for me, like as long as it's resonating with black women and they're taking it and it's coming to them at the time that they need and making them feel like, oh, it's okay for me to be more selfish, or it's okay for me to ask for this, or it's okay for me to like suck up all the air in the room, or to do all these things. Like as long as it kind of gives them a sense of like a way of seeing themselves, that to me is successful. That to me like kind of outsizes the negativity of it all. Yeah.
In your last premiere, when you first did your first reading, you talked about like black women, like kind of maybe being like mediocre at best.
Uh-huh.
Like expand on that like level of like black women not having to like over-succeed or that pressure to achieve, and how do you put that on page?
For sure. These are good questions, sister. I think that, you know, black people struggle with mediocrity and this idea of being normal. Black exceptionalism, I think, is just a consistent through line, you know, from the Talented 10th on down. And like, even though W. Du Bois like came back and was like, I was just kidding, people really took that to heart. You know, like you look at the figures and like people want to be remembered, they want legacy. And I think so much for us as like black American people, and so much of our history being like lost in the ocean, and like so much of our existence began in the Atlantic in some ways, and through that passage and the transform, like that becoming a new chapter. Everybody, like I think it's innate to want to be remembered because we like really put the heroes on a pedestal. But I think for black people, like being able to make a mark and say like, I did something of value, I'm a credit to my race. It's a different kind of aspiration. It's a different kind of ambition. And so I wanted to write about someone who was like very ordinary, because it's important to talk about that and like to celebrate that and to put that on the page. Like to have her be extraordinary is to continue to perpetuate a narrative that is the only way that we are valuable. And we have to separate those two things. Like value needs to be inherent. And I think that's one thing that I, as I'm getting older, have continued to grapple with. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what I'm working on the page, is like, is it okay to not always be excellent? You know, because I think it's one thing to say that and another thing to be that. It's another thing to actually get older and look at yourself and be like, I'm actually not excellent. That's a lot, you know, and especially because you go from, I mean, like even T's journey of starting as like, she's so great, she's so talented, she's going to clearly go to the league, she's going to do all this stuff, she's going to be like this huge star. And then that's not what happens for her. You know, and like grappling with her own disappointment and in some ways her own mediocrity, even though it's like her body that fails her rather than her innate skill, like being promised something and that not being granted to you, or feeling like something so close to you or within your reach and then it slipping from your fingers. It's like horrific for everyone, but I think for black people who feel like, oh, I'm going to make it and I'm going to be exceptional, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to succeed and I'm going to achieve, not getting there it's just a unique kind of heartbreak. So yeah, I wanted to write about Mickey, and in the end, she's okay. She kind of tastes that success, but I didn't want us to languish in it, because that's actually not the point. I didn't want that to be the point. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, can you talk about your writing process and what made you write this story and the commonalities that it kind of reflects on your personal journey and how you ended up with this story?
Yeah, so I am an overachiever, which is like whenever I tell people like what I'm doing at like all at the same time, they're just like, how do you do this? But like I got laid off from my job in 2019, and instead of being like, I'm gonna be sad or I'm gonna like pull a Mickey and go home, I was like, okay, I'm gonna start. I like was on a brand trip the next day. The next morning I was in Austin, and like carrying around the tag, like, because I was invited on the brand trip when I was still employed at that company, and like my tag just like said where I was working at the time. Like it was like Tembe Denton-Hurst and like editor at, and I was like, it was just like taunting me the whole time because I'm just recognizing like this is no longer who you are. Like, but the whole time I'm like marketing myself to all my like friends. I'm like, how do you freelance? How do we do this? I'm calling my friends like, I got laid off. Like, how do I do this? And I'm just like trying to pick myself back up. I had a new job 6 weeks later. My severance never even ran out. I was just on it. But like, it was only when my new manager at my new job was like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? I was having heart palpitations. Like I was so anxious. I was like, they're going to fire me again. Like, you kind of inherit all of this anxiety that I think is unhealthy, but I didn't really know how to process that because all I knew how was to continue on in like some ways, like how Lex was, like this idea of, you work, you get up, you pick up another shift actually, to distract yourself from the reality. You do more, you don't do less, you take it further, and so because that was kind of the way that I handled it, I wanted to kind of write about something else. But the way that the book even kind of came together was because I was in a writing workshop at the time, and I needed to write something. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I don't have anything prepared. And this was just what came out. And the original scene was actually her in the grocery store seeing T for the first time. And I thought it was going to be a short story. I was like, I just think it's kind of interesting because in some ways their relationship is like the jumping off point for the rest of the story, in the sense that they are like meeting each other in some ways in the same place for the first time. And so I wanted to kind of explore that and like the idea of like unfinished business, dashed hopes and dreams, reuniting, all of that stuff. So that's kind of how it all came together. But then I just like wrote a lot after that. Yes.
So when this is a movie,
Oh.
who do you see playing some of the central characters?
I only have like an idea for Mickey, and I like, for me in my head it's Precious Lee. She's not an actress, but she's fine, so. Yes.
So we talked about like nostalgia as a concept of why T is this kind of held on a pedestal person.
Mm-hmm.
But what about ego
Mm-hmm.
is included within that? Because often there's this ego of, because I see you as this person,
Mm-hmm.
then you must be that.
Of course.
And how did you write through that?
Yeah. I think that, great question. To your point, like, if T is not who Mickey believes she is, what does that say about Mickey? Because if you, like, in some ways, the people who you put your belief in are as much a reflection of you, as you are and your personal identity. Like, and then when they fail you, especially when they fail spectacularly in the sense that their lives go in completely different directions than what you expected, it's a unique kind of disappointment. So in some ways, she's trying to salvage her image of T in order to save herself. If T is still great and T is all this goodness, then maybe I am too. She's like looking for her own reflection in this person rather than turning that inward. And that's a lot easier than to say like, okay, I have to grapple with my own mediocrity. And obviously she's not doing a good job, right? She's all over the place. But, that I think is like the tension there. It's, in some ways she's just trying to find herself, and she's finding herself through this other person. So yeah. Yes.
What stage of Mickey's journey did you enjoy writing the most?
What did I enjoy? I think like Mickey as a character, I don't think that there was much I actually enjoyed. I enjoyed writing about Mickey's world and more than I enjoyed writing about Mickey. Like, I just enjoyed the atmosphere. So like some of my favorite scenes to write like was Jasmine, the cookout at Jasmine's house, the birthday party scene. I was like, oh my god, yes. Like anytime, all the side characters are my favorite. Like everybody who's not Mickey and T or like Mickey, T and Lex, I'm in love with. Like I'm like, they're like, because to me, like I spent so much time deep in their psyches that I don't really like, I understand them more than I like them. I think they're just kind of like, they're just characters. They're human people. I don't really like sit in judgment of them. But like the other, like writing about Grandma Anna, so much fun. Like writing about just all of the vibes. Like the vibes, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I'm having such a good time right now. Like it was, all of that stuff is fun for me. That was like that was the best part. Yeah.
Did you take a trip back home to pull inspiration for the atmosphere, or did you have your hero's journey back home?
I'm always here. I'm here often. Mainly because my little sister, she was born in 2018, and so I was like, I'm constantly home, and I was like, it was very important to me to like see her all the time so that she knows my name and like likes me and thinks I'm cool. So I'm here often. So it wasn't really like, I think it was more me in certain situations trying to like recreate like a version of the city that I knew from a long time ago. Cause like there's like gentle conversations about gentrification in the book and like the weirdness of like returning to a place that no longer looks like how it once did. And so I was kind of trying to like recall those images more than I think I was trying to like craft the setting. So yeah, I think these two like next questions. Yes.
Okay, so my question was about your process writing Nikki and creating her, bringing her to life. How did that impact your relationship with yourself and the way that you saw yourself?
Yeah, I think writing this book changed my life in a lot of ways. I think that for me, I was like, if I'm able to have so much empathy and understanding for that person that doesn't exist, can I do that for myself? You know, like it was really a process of like learning how to have grace for me because, you know, I am very hard on myself and I try to be a lot of things to a lot of people. And having Mickey be like nothing to anyone, like, and like in some cases a problem and a headache and a burden, I was like, okay, well, like if all these people still love her despite, and like they're like telling her like you have inherent value despite, I'm like, I'm producing all of these things all the time, and like maybe all of that actually has nothing to do with my value as a person. You know, I got to ask myself those questions. I got to interrogate, take stock of my whole entire life, just all of the things like I got to explore all of those themes like in my own life because I was writing about them, and I had to like dig deep and like look at all the evidence that I had of that in my own life, my friends' lives, and people's lives that I knew. It was really, I don't want to say it was healing because I think that that's not necessarily the way to put it, but it was clarifying for sure. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the whole book? Or like, yeah, because like I feel like, or did you do it full time? Like, did you take a break from your day job?
Absolutely not, and that's why people think I'm crazy. Yeah, no, I would wake up at 5 a.m. every day and write for the most part. And yeah, I mean, and I even took breaks. Like I think there was one like stretch where I didn't write for like 2 months, and I was like, I'm being so lazy right now. But that's like just part of the process. I feel like you shouldn't force it if it doesn't make sense. But I wrote it in a year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was.
Your I guess your editor, like, were they like pressuring you? Like, did you feel pressure when you were writing, or?
No, because like, okay, so I guess just like behind the scenes things, like when it comes, especially selling your debut, there's like nobody. It's just like you in a dark room with a like laptop or a pen and paper or I don't know, a scribe, whatever. Like it's really just like you thing. And then so like other voices don't get brought in until like once you sell the book and once you sell the whole production. That's like a different, you know, part of it. The rewrite, there was definitely a lot of pressure. I like honestly rewrote the book in 6 weeks, which was like very do not recommend, like would not do it again. But yeah, it's like that's when it like really was the most pressure was then. But yeah. Okay. Yeah. Last questions.
You talked about having a different title at first. I'm wondering how you like landed on Homebodies after the initial title.
Yeah, this is a question I hate to answer the most because I really don't remember. I think it was like they were just like, this isn't working, and then somehow we got to the Homebodies of it all. I can't remember who suggested it, but like the title's relation to the novel, I think, has a lot to do with home bodies. Like the return to home as a space, making a home within yourself. Like, you know, it all just kind of came together and worked. So yeah.
Let's give them a round of applause, everybody.